Chapter 1 of The Adventures of a Bear, and a Great Bear too. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Marie Christian. The Adventures of a Bear, and a Great Bear too, by Alfred Elwes. Chapter 1 At Home. Yes, it is an at-home to which I am going to introduce you, but not the at-home that many of you, I hope all of you, have learnt to love, but the at-home of a bear. No carpeted rooms, no warm curtains, no glowing fireside, no pictures, no sofas, no tables, no chairs, no music, no books, no agreeable cozy chat, no anything half so pleasant, but soft moss or snow, spreading trees, skies with ever-changing tinted clouds, some fun, some rough romps, a good deal of growling, and now and then a fight. With these points of difference, you may believe the at-home of a bear is not quite so agreeable a matter as the at-home of a young gentleman or lady. Yet I have no doubt Master Bruin is much more at his ease in it than he would find himself if he were compelled to conform to the usages of human society, and behave as a gentleman ought to do. But there is a quality that is quite as necessary to adorn one home as the other, without which the most delightful mansion and the warmest cavern can never be happy, and with which the simplest cottage and the meanest den may be truly blessed. And that one quality is good temper. Of what avail are comforts or even luxuries when there is no seasoning of good temper to enjoy them with? How many deficiencies can there not be overlooked when good temper is present to cover them with a veil? Perhaps you have not yet learnt what a valuable treasure this good temper is. When you have read the history of my bear, you will be better able to form an opinion. I cannot tell you when this bear was born, nor am I quite sure where. Bears are born in so many parts of the world now, that it becomes very difficult to determine what country heard their first growl, and they never think to preserve a memorandum of the circumstance. Let it suffice that our bear was born, that he had a mamma and papa, and some brothers and sisters, that he lived in a cavern surrounded by trees and bushes, that he was always a big lump of a bear, invariably wore a brown coat, and was often out of temper, or rather, was always in temper, only that temper was a very bad one. No doubt his parents would have been very willing to cure this terrible defect, if they had known how. But the fact is, they seemed always too much absorbed in their own thoughts to attend much to their family. Old Mr. Bruin would sit in his corner by the hour together sucking his paw, and his partner, Mrs. Bruin, would sit in her corner sucking her paw, whilst the little ones or big ones, for they were growing up fast, would make themselves into balls and roll about the ground, or bite one another's ears by way of a joke, or climb up the neighboring trees to admire the prospect, and then slip down again to the imminent destruction of their clothes. Not that a rent or two would have grieved their mother very much, for she was a great deal too old, and too ignorant besides, to think of mending them. In all these sports Master Bruin, the eldest, was ever the foremost, but as certain as he joined in the romps, so surely were uproar and fighting the consequence. The reason was clear enough. His temper was so disagreeable that although he was quite ready to play off his jokes on others, he could never bear to receive them in return. And being besides very fierce and strong, he came at length to be considered as the most unbearable bear that the forest had known for many generations, and in his own family was looked on as quite a bugbear. Now I privately think that if a good oaken stick had been applied to his shoulders, or any other sensitive part of his body, whenever he displayed these fits of spleen, the exercise would have had a very beneficial effect on his disposition. But his father on such occasions only uttered his opinion in so low a growl that it was impossible to make out what he said, and then sucked his paw more vigorously than ever. And his mother was much too tender-hearted to think of mending his manners in so rude a way. So Master Bruin grew apace, until his brothers and sisters were wicked enough to wish he might some day go out for a walk and forget to come home again, or that he might be persuaded by a kind friend to emigrate, without going through the ceremony of taking leave of his family. It began to be conjectured that some such event had occurred, when for 3 whole days he never made his appearance. The respectable family of the Bruins were puzzled, but calm, notwithstanding, at this unusual absence. It evidently made them thoughtful, though it was impossible to guess what they thought about. If one could form an idea from the attitudes of the different members, each of whom sat in a corner sucking his right paw and his left paw alternately. It was a family habit, you must know. I should say their thoughts were too deep for expression. But before their meditations were converted from uncertainty into mourning, the object of them made his appearance at the entrance of the cavern, with his coat torn, limping in his gait, and with an ugly wound in his head, looking altogether as disconsolate a brute as you can well conceive. He did not condescend to say where he had been, nor what he had been doing. Perhaps no one made the inquiry, but it was very evident he had been doing no good, and had got his reward accordingly. If, however, this great bear's ill temper was remarkable before, judge what it must have been with such a sore head. The experience of mankind has led to the opinion that there are few more disagreeable beings in creation than ill-nurtured bears. Bears that have been ill-licked, those great fierce, sullen, cross-grained, and ill-tempered beasts that are, unhappily, to be found in every part of this various world. But when all these unhandsome qualities are found in one individual of the species, and that one happens to have a sore head into the bargain, it is easy to believe the at home which he honors or dishonors with his presence can neither be very quiet nor particularly comfortable. Habit makes many things supportable which at first would seem beyond our powers of endurance. Mr. and Mrs. B, and indeed all the other Bs, male and female, had got so used to the tyranny of this ill-tempered animal that they put up with his moroseness almost without a growl. But there is a limit to sufferance beyond which neither men nor bears can travel, and that boundary was at last attained with the Bs. As what I am now about to relate is, however, rather an important fact in my biography, I must inform you how the matter occurred, and what were the circumstances which led to it. You are, perhaps, aware that bears, being of rather an indolent disposition, are not accustomed to hoard up a store of provision for their wants in the winter, but prefer, in their own country at least, sleeping through the short dreary days and long bitter nights, and thus avoid the necessity of taking food for some weeks, although they grow very thin during their lengthened slumbers. I forget what this time is called in bears' language, but we give it the name of hibernation. Now it happened that Mrs. Bruin had taken it into her head to lay by this winter a nice little stock, which she very carefully buried at a short distance from the mouth of the cavern, when she felt the usual drowsiness of the season coming on, and having covered the spot with a heap of dead leaves, that she might know it again when she woke up, she crawled into bed, and turning her back to her old partner, who was already in a comfortable state of forgetfulness, went fast asleep. The whole family rather overslept themselves, for the sun was quite brilliant when they awoke, and it was very evident that they had been dozing away for some months. The ill-tempered bear was the first on his legs, and kicking his 2 nearest brothers as he got up, just to hint to them that he was awake again, he opened his mouth to its whole extent, and a very great extent it was, too, and stretching his limbs one after another, and giving himself a hearty shake instead of washing, shaving, and combing, he scuffled to the entrance of the cavern and sniffed at the fresh air. He sniffed, and the more he sniffed, the more certainly did his nose whisper that there was something else besides fresh air which he was inhaling. The smell of the fresh air, too, or the something else, caused him a tremendous appetite, which was every moment becoming greater. And then it entered his bearish brain that where there was a smell there must be something to occasion it. Whereupon, following that great nose of his, and he could not have had a better guide, he scuffled out of the cavern and down the path till he reached a little mound of earth and leaves, where, the odor being strongest, he squatted down. With his great paws he soon demolished the entrance to his mamma's larder, and lost no time in pulling out some of the dainties it contained, which without more ado he set about devouring. Meanwhile his brothers, who had been aroused by the affectionate conduct of the eldest, were by this time also wide awake, and had quite as good appetites as Bruin himself. And though on ordinary occasions they stood in great awe of that most ill-tempered brute, it must be admitted that this was an extraordinary occasion, and they acted accordingly. Just fancy being months without anything to eat, and having appetites fierce enough to devour one another. So they rushed to the spot where Bruin was making so excellent a meal, and without any other apology than a short grunt or two, they seized upon some of the hidden treasures, and with little ceremony crammed them into their hungry jaws. Bruin was thunderstruck. Never before had they ever presumed to dip their paws into his dish, and now they were actually before his face, converting the most delicate morsels to their own use, and, as it were, taking the food out of his very mouth. After an internal struggle of a few seconds, during which it seemed doubtful whether his emotions or his greediness in filling his jaws so full would choke him, he uttered a savage growl, and with one stroke of his huge paw felled his younger brother to the ground. Then turning to the second, he flew at him like a fury, and seemed resolved to make him share a similar fate. But the other, who was not wanting in courage, and who was strengthened by the idea that there was something still in the larder worth fighting for, and which he would certainly lose if he ran away, warded off his blows, and by careful management, now dodging, now striking, kept his brother at bay, and avoided coming to such close quarters as to subject himself to Bruin's hug, for he knew, if he once felt that embrace, there was not much chance of his having any appetite left with which to complete his half-finished breakfast. The noise of the combat had now, however, roused the family. Mrs. B. was the first to make her appearance, and she was soon followed by the rest. Explanations ensued, although the facts of the case were sufficiently clear, and Bruin's character was well known. Old Ursus Major drew himself up, and for once in his life assumed a dignified demeanor. The ill-tempered bear stood abashed before his parents, although he moved his head to and fro in an obstinate manner, as though rejecting all interference. It is a pity I cannot relate to you what was said upon this occasion, for old Bruin is reported to have made a very eloquent discourse on the horrible effects of ill temper and greediness, and good advice is worth having, whether uttered by a bear or any other animal. Suffice it, that after lecturing his son on the enormity of his offenses, which probably he was himself partly the cause of, through not punishing many of his previous errors, he bid him quit forever his paternal roof, and seek his fortune elsewhere, cautioning him at the same time that if he ever expected to get through the world with credit to his name, and even comfort to his person, he must be honest, good-tempered, and forbearing. Bruin took this advice in most ungracious part, and without exchanging a word with any of the family, although it was evident his poor old mother longed to hug him in her arms, he growled out some unintelligible words and set forth upon his travels. End of chapter 1.